President Bola Tinubu will today present the 2024 Appropriation Bill to a joint session of the National Assembly. The Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Abubakar Bagudu, disclosed this to State House correspondents after the close of Federal Executive Council's weekly meeting presided over by Tinubu at the Aso Rock Villa, Abuja. Bagudu also revealed that the Federal Executive Council approved the increment of the 2024 budget from the initial 26.01 trillion considered by the Council to 27.5 trillion, stating that the federal government is projecting 18 trillion revenue for the 2024 fiscal year. The minister said further details of the budget will be presented when the president presents the budget to a joint session of the National Assembly on Wednesday. According to Bagudu, the medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, passed by the National Assembly is being reviewed by the Council. Joining us now on the morning show as we review the 2024 Appropriation Bill to be presented to a joint session of the National Assembly today is Professor Eregha, a professor of macroeconomics at the School of Management and Social Sciences, Pan-Atlantic University, Lekki, Lagos. Professor Eregha was among the 5 consultants that built the Nigerian Economic Summit Group medium-term macroeconometric model on Nigerian economy. Good morning, Professor Eregha. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Bati, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Well, we've been talking about appropriation bill that will be presented before the National Assembly today at a joint session. First, we would like to know your take on the fundamentals. 27.5 trillion naira, 18 trillion naira projected revenue, benchmark rate of 750 naira to the dollar for the foreign exchange, and oil benchmark now increased to 77.96 naira. Then, in addition to all of this, government is asking for leave to borrow over 7 trillion naira in addition to the country's existing debt stock. You are the economist. What do you think?
Okay, first, thank you so much for inviting me. Just an highlight of some of the details of the budget. One is a budget of about 27.5 trillion. So if you compare that to, let's say, the 2023, which was about 27.7, in naira terms, it's an increase. But if you consider the unification, which we expect that should rake in more revenue, and also subsidy removal, then what needs to be done is to say, if we take that into account and rebase the budget based on taking us back to the same economic condition of 2023, it's not really an increase in real terms. What do I mean? The dollar terms for that budget is about 750. So for 2023, we have about $432 as the absorption for that 2023. So on that, we have a 2023 budget that's about $42 billion, as against this one that will be about $39 billion, right? That is one point to make. The second point to make is that if you look at the structure of the budget, I didn't see any serious departure from the previous budget that we have been seeing. What do I mean? Debt service to revenue of this budget is almost about 50%. And that is almost the same level that the 2023 budget was. 2023 budget was about 60%. And in actual, from January to July, we have a 2023 budget that has a debt service to revenue ratio of about 75%. So it means that there is no serious departure in terms of these dynamics, right? That is the second point to me. The third point that I will make on the current budget is also of the fact that there is no serious departure, because if you look at the capital expenditure to the recurrent expenditure, it's still about 70-30, which still shows that there is no serious departure. It's almost like the same kind of structure that we will be having. That is another point. The fourth point I want to make is that if you look at the borrowing, one of the ways to finance the budget, which is the deficit, is almost at the same par with the 2023 budget. So my point is that if we are going to have unification, which will rake in more revenue because custom will have a revaluation of, a new valuation of their custom duties because of exchange rate that will move from about 400 to about 700, right? So we should expect more revenue coming in from there. And then on the oil side also, because of unification, we should also have more revenue. And then subsidy removal, we were informed that it's going to free up resources for the government. Then I expect that in real terms, this budget should be far higher, or in terms of expenditure, or in terms of revenue, we should have a significant, difference, because 2023 was about 11 trillion. This one is about maybe 18 trillion. So in dollar terms, or if you put it in real terms, I didn't see any significant difference. That is another point to make. The other point I want to also make is that, the president has a vision of taking this economy into a $1 trillion economy by 2026. Now, if we are going to have a growth rate of about 4% in this current budget, and if you look at the MTEF that this budget is coming from, and that by 2026 we are going to have a GDP of about 292 trillion naira. If you put that on the exchange rate absorption of the MTEF, that means our economy will still be about $500 billion, not $1 trillion. So my first advice to the government is to, as they are taking a look at revising the MTEF, they need to know that there is a vision for the president to take this economy to 1 trillion. So if you go on this same path of 4% growth, and with the absorptions and the structure of this economy, I don't think that by 2026, we're going to have an economy that will be, $1 trillion. And this is one caveat and one area the government need to look into as they work on revising, the MTEF, and at the same time as the National Assembly look into this budget. And make proper make suggestions for the executive to do some changes that will actually take us into this vision that we're talking about.
Okay, Prof. Thank you so much. So first question will be this 1 trillion narrative. From 1 trillion economic growth in the next 3 years, now they've moved it to another 7 years. Is it hyper headline or realistic expectation? That's the first question I'd like to ask. Secondly, when you adjust for, the devaluation of the currency, you've been able to state that this budget is even lower based on what we're able to get last year. Also, I want you to also account for inflation parameters, because the inflation, as at the last budget, was less compared to the one we have now. So what the value of your money can get you is no longer what the value of your money can get you as at last year. In fact, it looks as though this outgoing year, the start of year 2023, was way better than where we are now. I also want you to extrapolate that in your calculation. Also, the government claims that now that we remove subsidy, the money comes to the federal government. But when you look at the interplay of petrol on the international market, let's ask ourselves the critical question. Are we truly done with subsidies? Because the price had been constant for a while. The president announced that the price will be constant. But we've had fluctuations on the international market of prices. So are we truly done with subsidies? Those three questions, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Rufai, for those good questions. Let me start with the last one. When the president made this announcement to say subsidy is gone in May, right, this year, you agree that as at that time, our exchange rate was probably still about 450 or 460. Now later there was unification, right? So the the subsidy, the pump price, moved to about 400, later to 500, and currently it's still about 560 something by NNPC. And I remember I was invited to speak on this issue the last time. Now, if exchange rate is currently, I've moved to, even in the official, which we call the NIFES or something, which is the official, has moved to about 800, and crude oil price has been, up and down globally, it implies that the price cannot be constant if subsidy has been removed and we have regulated that market properly. So somehow, we are back to subsidy. I am sure that there is under recovery, like the NNPC used to claim, that is happening, even though we don't know there's no transparency around what is going to be paid or what to be paid. I think what I have seen over the years is that anytime we have, physical challenge, we try to adjust, the pump price with the name of proper deregulation, and then over time keep it at that for a long time, and then later we'll now come out to say there is subsidy. So I think it's that kind of adjustment that we are doing. If we have properly deregulated the market, then the price of pump price should not be constant by NPs. And I remember I made a statement to say that with the kind of subsidy removal that we have done, the kind of market is so important. What we have is either a collusive or a market that is oligopolistic and is led by the NNPC, which has the power to do what we call crude for fuel exchange, or because they have access to dollar, and then they can import better than the major marketers. Therefore, they will keep price constant and then do some under recovery for the subsidy that is not budgeted for. So I think that subsidy is back. That is one point. The first question has to do with a 1 trillion economy, in 7 years, and I can say that it is possible. The only problem is the kind of fiscal policies and with the policy environment in terms of not just fiscal policy, but the coordination between fiscal and monetary policy and transparency around our policies, and then spending on what I call, quality expenditure, which is focusing on reducing cost of governance and ensuring efficiency of spending. And because our fiscal policy has, a way of eroding the benefit of policy decisions or policy expectation that we have. So my point is that yes, it is possible. However, we need to estimate what will be the financing need of that kind of GDP that we are looking at by 1 trillion economy. If we put our economy on the same pedestal, right, it means that we need about 30% of that amount to be invested from now till then. So let's say we want a 1 trillion economy, let's say now, it means that about $300 billion need to be invested, because our investment to GDP ratio currently is about 30%. So we need about a $300 billion investment. And if we accumulate that to the next, 7 years, then you can think about something that is running to how many $billion. So my point is that it is possible, but in terms of investment, we need to bring in that financing strategy that could finance that GDP, and that comes from the private sector. It also comes from the government, but currently the government is the only one that is known, because government is financed by the budget and then also by the MTEF. So my point is that the financing strategy has to be clear, and in terms of the quality of spending and cost of governance to be properly reduced, and ensure that there is synergy between monetary and fiscal policy, and we should also be very transparent in our spending, and not just transparent, but spend on quality infrastructure. As of today, with all the money we have spent, our infrastructure to GDP ratio still remains at 35%. That is one point. Secondly, we have removed subsidy, which is fine, and then we have unified, and our revenue, reckoning for revenue in terms of this budget is not still that significant. It means that probably the subsidy removal is not really properly done, or if it's done, then we need to look at some items around the removal and see some transparency to ensure that the transparency has actually raking some revenue, or we are going to spend more. So my point is that it is very possible. It's not just an ambition, but the government need to be ready to ensure coordination between monetary and fiscal policy. And not only that, there should be internal consistency around MDAs and coordination, and there should also be internal consistency within the central bank itself for us to realize all of this. That is the only way we can provide an environment that will allow the private sector to take the lead in terms of driving the growth that could take us to that kind of economy that we are talking about.
Professor Eregha, I asked you earlier about the plan to borrow 7 trillion, which is going to increase the debt stock.
Yeah.
Maybe you still return to that. But the question I want to ask you now is that in terms of allocation, what will you recommend to be the priorities? In previous budget cycles, we have seen a situation whereby recurrent expenditure gets the bulk of it. Capital expenditure, yes, there may be allocations, but in terms of actual performance, not much is seen. And then government is saying 18 trillion as projected revenue. I heard you saying that's significant, but some people said that's ambitious because we may not be able to get up to 18 trillion given the distortions within the economy. And that in any case, now that government is going to, then if the budget is 27.5 trillion, it means there's a deficit of about 9 trillion, right? So, and we are borrowing 7 trillion. How do we explain all these misalignments to use your phrase.
Okay, so my point is this. If you look at the structure of the borrowing, if we have a deficit that is about 9 trillion, it means that if we are going to have a new borrowing, by the structure of that budget, it shows that we are going to have about 87% of that money to be as new borrowing that will be added to the previous debt that is already close to about 90 trillion, right? So new borrowing will be about 87% of that, which is about 7 trillion. Now, if you disaggregate that to domestic and foreign borrowing, domestic borrowing will take about 86% by the structure that I've seen. And foreign will take about 24%. So if we look at this structure in terms of disaggregating the new borrowing into domestic and foreign, right, and in terms of the new borrowing as a function of the total deficit, which is about 87%, if you do that for 2023 budget, it's almost the same structure. So my point is that what we have done is almost following the same pattern that we have been doing before. I'm not seeing a serious departure, even though the deficit in this budget is about 7 trillion compared to 2023 that is about 11 trillion, right? But the structure in terms of the new borrowing for domestic and foreign is the same. And what that means, if you're going to have 87% of that borrowed from the domestic economy, then you're going to crowd out private investment. That is one. Number two is that it will put pressure on interest rate. Interest rate will increase. And when interest rate increases, there will be decline in investment. Output will fall, then export fall. Then we're going to have issues around current account balance that will come back to our what we call the foreign reserve situation, and that will put pressure on our already unstable exchange rate. So my point is that we need to have a proper financing strategy that will not crowd out the private sector, because we need a private sector-led growth. In this case, should complement complement and provide the environment for private sector-led growth to take place if we are to get to that 1 trillion economy that we are projecting. So the point here is that the structure is not a serious departure from what we have been seeing before. And if we want to see a serious departure, then National Assembly need to go into work to look at the structure itself very well, and at the same time look at the financing strategy that will not crowd out the private sector. Because when the private sector is crowded out in terms of investment, output falls, and when output falls, the effect will be on the foreign reserve, which will also have effect on the same exchange rate that we have instability on. Remember recently the central bank governor spoke about ensuring there will be coordination, and one of his assignment is to stop physical activities, which means that they will not be financing some of the things that they used to finance, but they will focus on price stability. If they focus on price stability with this kind of spending that is coming, interest rate goes up, will mean that real money balance will fall, real wage will fall, and then what will happen is that inflation will still trigger up. Inflation will not reduce as it should be. And what the central bank as a focus of price stability will do is to jack up interest rate, and that will still have serious implication on businesses, right? And then put on more pressure on already a tense economy. Okay. So my point is that we need to have a proper financing strategy that will not crowd out the private sector, so that we can have a structural departure from the structure that we have been having before in terms of new borrowing and that comes from both foreign and domestic. Because even the foreign borrowing, if we don't have a proper strategy for it, it has exchange rate risk. An example, when we did unification, because the economy could not carry it to 700 to about 750, you saw how our debt moved to about 80-something trillion.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. So two things. Number one, you said 1 trillion economy is possible. Then you said if we're having $300 billion worth of investment yearly, how feasible is that? Secondly, even if we are growing 20% month on month, year on year, which is not possible. You can tell me, Prof, you're the president of economy, you know any economy in the world growing 20% now. If we are growing 20%, we can't get to $1 trillion, in the next 2, 3, or 4 years, even if we are going 20%. So where is the $300 billion investment going to come in this economy? And talk to me about cost-benefit ratio of our projects and capital projects and our capital expenditure. That's a very important part we don't talk about.
Yeah, so first, I think I made a statement in the beginning to say that if you look at the budget, the absorption of growth on this budget is about 4%, right? If you have a 4%, on average, for the MTF to 2026 is showing that we are going to grow on average about 4%. There is no way we can hit 1 trillion with that kind of growth path. That is my first point. My second point is that when we design budget and take policy framework, we need evidence-based framework. Currently now we don't have a framework that is driven by evidence. What do I mean? For instance, the budget was 26 point something trillion, and then before, it moved to about 27. And the question is that what framework, is guiding that change that we had? Because the MTEF shows 26% from 26 trillion, then now we now change to 27. Because there are certain assumptions behind a proper framework. And when you look at the projection of those assumptions, if the framework is evidence-based, then you do your adjustment based on that. So let's say we want to have a 1 trillion economy, let's say, in the next 7 years, then you need to do an estimate of what kind of growth path do we need from now to that time. If you don't do that estimate that is based on evidence to look at the growth path, you won't get there. Look at Vision 2020, all of these things that we have had in the past. For instance, the Vision 20 want to be the 20th economy by the year 2020. And that economy should be an economy about $900 billion dollar. We could not get there. Highest we got as at that time was about 400 billion. Why? Because the framework was not evidence-based that would help you to go back to say, what policy stance do I need that will give me a growth rate that could lead to that economy? You have to look at that. When that is determined, then you now need to get the average growth for those years. If you are going to grow for 4 years for the next number of years, that will not happen. We need to grow on average of about, if I do a back of envelope analysis, we need an average growth for nothing less than 8%. Nothing less than 8%, and sometimes up to about 10%. If we do that, and we support that with the financing strategy that I mentioned about. And when I say financial, I didn't say that we need about 300 billion every year. What I mean is that, for instance, if in seven years' time we're expecting a 1 trillion economy, right? If we currently, our investment to GDP, if we are not even going to increase investment, our investment to GDP is about 30-35%, right? It then implies that for every year, for every projection of GDP that we want to have to get to that level, we need about 35% of it invested back to the economy. That is the only way we could get there. And that investment comes from private, it comes from foreign, it comes from government. Now, it's the government one that we are seeing, but government also need to ensure that their spending will bring the kind of infrastructure. And by the way, government spending cannot give us the kind of infrastructure that can get there. That is why we need a proper framework for a PPP arrangement. And knowing fully well that there are a lot of capital flowing all around, looking for where they want to invest in terms of financing infrastructure. But we don't have a proper framework that can attract them currently now to Nigeria, to have a proper PPP arrangement that could take us there on that path. And those are the things that government need to look into as we go on this part of this budget to 2027.
Thank you so much for your analysis this morning, Prof. The last time we had an outlier massive growth of 15% was the early 2000s, I think 2002 or 2003. And since then, we've never had that kind of outlier growth again. But thank you so much for your analysis.